Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we're done with the Western Conference previews. It's time to move on to the Eastern Conference, starting with the Atlantic Division in 2023. Guys, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. For joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure that you subscribe down below, youtube.com/I-80 Sports. And while you're here, make sure you drop a comment down below talking about what you're excited to see in the Atlantic Division this year. Who do you think's going to do well? Who do you think's maybe going to live at the bottom of the barrel? Let us know. Comment down below. And while you're there, drop a like and hit the bell notification so that way you know when we go live and when I finally learn English, which will be great too. If you're still on X, make sure that you follow us down below at I80_Sports NHL. And if you follow us on X, thank you guys so much because we greatly value all of your support. I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And here we are to preview a division that's got some changes coming to it. For lack of a better word, the changing of the guard of the Atlantic Division this year, I think is going to happen. And it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. So let's just get right to it.
Yeah, we're going to dive right in. And I got to say, just like right from the jump, that the Atlantic Division is probably the toughest to peg on paper, at least for me. I know for other people, I mean, certainly you Toronto fans are going to have your opinions out there. And rightfully so. I mean, we're all still waiting for Toronto's year for it to be their year. But I think it was really difficult for me to peg on paper just how good each team was going to be because, honestly, there's really no bargain binning teams here in the Atlantic Division, minus maybe one team that we'll get into in a little bit. But away we go. Let's talk first about some key additions and subtractions throughout the offseason. We had quite a bit of movement go on, so let's just dive head first into this, starting with the Boston Bruins. Some key additions here for them. Morgan Geekie, Milan Lucic, Kevin Shattenkirk, James Van Riemsdyk, and Jesper Boqvist with key subtractions. And, well, we've got a bit of them. Taylor Hall, Nick Foligno, Connor Clifton, Garnett Hathaway, Dmitry Orlov, Mike Riley, Tyler Bertuzzi, Thomas Nosek, Patrice Bergeron, and David Krejci. We're going to be talking quite a bit about Boston here, and I wish it was for better reasons. Moving on to the Buffalo Sabres, some key additions.
The new sweaters, though, I will admit.
Oh, yeah, no, the new sweaters for the Centennial look fantastic. They look beautiful. They're definitely like elite tier, amazing new jerseys this year. And if you disagree, I mean, you're just a troll, to be honest. Buffalo Sabres, some key additions here. Dustin Tokarski, Eric Johnson, Justin Richards, and Connor Clifton. Key subtractions here: Vinny Hinostroza, Craig Anderson, Malcolm Subban, Austin Strand, and Ilya Lyubushkin. Moving on to the Detroit Red Wings. Key additions here in Alex DeBrincat, JT Compher, Jeff Petrie, Shane Gostisbehere, Klim Kostin, Justin Holl, Daniel Sprong, Christian Fisher, and James Reimer. So Steve Yzerman staying quite busy as the general manager for the Detroit Red Wings this offseason. Key subtractions also staying busy on this front. Key subtractions for the Detroit Red Wings: Dominic Kubalik, Philip Zadina, Pius Suter, Alex Chiasson, Adam Erne, Robert Haig, Gustav Lindstrom, Alex Nedeljkovic, and Magnus Hellberg. On to the Florida Panthers. Some key additions here in Evan Rodriguez, Steven Lorentz, Kevin Stenlund, Rasmus Asplund, Nico Mikkola, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Dmitry Kulikov, Mike Riley, and Anthony Stolarz. Key subtractions for the Florida Panthers: Anthony Duclair, Eric Stahl, Colin White, Patrick Hornqvist, Radko Gudas, Mark Stahl, and Alex Lyon. On to the Montreal Canadiens. Some key additions here: Alex Newhook, Elias Anderson, Casey DeSmith, Nathan Lagar, and Gustav Lindstrom. Oh my goodness. Wow. That was jarring on my part. Key subtractions here for the Montreal Canadiens: Jeff Petrie, Joel Edmondson, Jonathan Drouin, Dennis Gurianov, Chris Tierney, Rem Pitlick, Mike Hoffman, Paul Byron, and Casey DeSmith. In the same offseason, they pick up Casey DeSmith and then trade him to Vancouver. So fun stuff over there in the Montreal world. Over to the Ottawa Senators. Key additions here: Joonas Korpisalo, Dominic Kubalik, Vladimir Tarasenko, Yuri Shmelka, Matthew Highmore, Nicholas Montepallo, Garrett Palan, Josh Curry, Donovan Sabrango, Zach McCowan, and I just
you're gonna butcher the hell out of that name.
Boca and Mama. I realized that it's a shortened name, so it's all good. Key subtractions in for the Ottawa Senators: Alex DeBrincat, Cam Talbot, Dylan Gambrell, Austin Watson, Derek Brassard, Julian Gauthier, Nick Holden, Patrick Brown, and Yakov Novak. To the Tampa Bay Lightning, key additions here: Connor Sheary, Jonas Johansson, Luke Glendening, Calvin DeHaan, Tyler Mott, Austin Watson, Logan Brown, and Mitchell Chaffee. Key subtractions for the Tampa Bay Lightning: Alex Killorn, Patrick Maroon, Ross Colton, Ian Cole, Trevor Carrick, Corey Perry, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, and Brian Elliott. To the Toronto Maple Leafs, finally, your one and only Toronto Maple Leafs. Key additions: Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, John Klingberg, Ryan Reeves, Martin Jones, Simone Benoit, Dylan Gambrell, Max LaJoy, and William Legason. Oh my God, I cannot speak tonight. Key subtractions here: Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Shen, Michael Bunting, Noel Achari, Alexander Kerfoot, Justin Hull, Wayne Simmons, Zach Aston Reitz, Eric Gustafson, Jordy Ben, Victor Mott, Carl Dahlstrom, Mac Hollowell, Philip Kral, Eric Kallgren, Radim Zahorna, and Semyon I'm not even going to try to pronounce that one. He didn't even play in the NHL last year, for God's sake. Now you're just messing with me, Tom. You're doing this on purpose. All right. Let me take a second to recollect myself after the aneurysm I just gave myself trying to read that name. Tom, I rattled off a whole bunch of different moves there. So let's start here with you across the Atlantic Division here. What were some of your favorite transactions for some teams? What did you like across the division?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but I'm going to say it again. And I know I delved into this a lot during our off-season review episode. But what more can I say? I love what Ottawa did. You bring in Vladimir Tarasenko, Dominic Kubalik, Joonas Korpisalo to already bolster a lineup led by Tim Stutzle, Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, and Claude Giroux is huge. I also like what the provincial rivals over there in Toronto did as well. You changed the team a little bit. You got a little more gritty by bringing in Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi to add grit, but not at the expense of scoring. These guys can score goals. They can chime in. They can score a goal. They can dish out some assists. They can get into fights. They can do it all. Maybe that's what the Leafs are missing. Maybe that's exactly it. And with this and what I'm looking at in this, and guys, don't quote me on this, this is not set in stone. What the Leafs are potentially doing here with these guys is that they're using Austin Matthews, John Tavares, and William Nylander as the three-headed monster down the line with their centers. So we got to see where it goes here, but that's interesting to see what they're trying to get at here. Honorable mention to Tampa Bay too. I'm going to talk about them in a little bit because there's certain things Tampa did here that even I glossed over, and I didn't realize it until I was looking at their lineup the other day and saying, wow, this may prolong the contendership. I don't even know if that's a word down in Tampa, but I'm going to turn it over to you here, Brian.
I'll tackle your point before when we're thinking about favorite moves across the Atlantic Division here. I really do like what Ottawa did this offseason. They look primed to make a potential big jump in the standings this year. And just looking at their potential starting lineup, I'm not going to try to give you guys like a big preview until we actually get there via Daily Faceoff. But Vladimir Tarasenko inserting himself into this second line, I think is going to be great, potentially next to Josh Norris and Drake Batherson. I think that's going to be a really, really tight line and a really fun line to watch. And that's just your second line. Even your third line, adding Dominic Kubalik to play alongside and Shaden Pinto, I really, really like what the Ottawa Senators have tried to do this offseason. And they didn't touch the defense because they really didn't need to touch the defense in the offseason. Defense still looks strong, but you add a much needed goaltender in Joonas Korpisalo to play in front of Anton Forsberg. And I think Korpisalo is a lot more solid of an option than a lot of people realize. This is a goaltender that a few years ago stood on his head for the Columbus Blue Jackets against the likes of the Toronto Maple Leafs and Tampa Bay Lightning. He is quite familiar with the Eastern Conference, with the Atlantic Division. I think him being a part of the Ottawa Senators this year as your potential 1A solution here, I think is going to help the Ottawa Senators make that jump in the standings. I'll mention it here too, because I feel like if I don't, I might get my head chopped off. Yeah, Toronto's moves on paper are pretty solid. You look up and down the lineup, adding Tyler Bertuzzi to that top line of Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner is just smart on paper. It makes that top line one of the scariest top lines, at least on paper, for the Toronto Maple Leafs this year. Looking at their third line, adding Max Domi with William Nylander, I think could be a lot of fun. That's if they stick to Willie Nylander playing on the third line at center for them this year. If they got to commit to that idea, if they don't commit to that idea, I think all of a sudden you really ruin your depth. If William Nylander come, December, January is playing on the second line with John Tavares, I don't know how strong the depth really is for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's still going to be left to be seen, although I'll still be excited for the moves that they made. Going across over to America, going over to the Detroit Red Wings. I had to think about geographically where I was for a second there, but it's fine. I'm not only bad at English, I'm bad at geography too. But another team that's hoping to make that potential jump, and I think might fall a little bit short, but I still like what they did, was the Detroit Red Wings, ironically adding former Ottawa Senator Alex DeBrincat. The combo of Dylan Larkin and Alexander DeBrincat could be a lot of fun to watch this year. And it stinks for a team like Detroit to not make this potential leap along with some of the other teams in the Atlantic Division. A preview for what I might say later, Detroit is getting there, and I think they're really it's either this year or next year that they got to make that jump. But I don't know if they make that jump this year. Just looking at how well some of the other Atlantic Division teams really, really improved across the board this past offseason. Tom, moving it on over to you. Which teams do you feel like made the most improvements, and who looks worse on paper coming into the regular season?
Well, like I said, I'm not going to go into Ottawa again. You heard me talk about them enough, so I'm not going to go into them again. In a way, as a Ranger fan, it upsets me seeing Giroux and Tarasenko playing together because of our idiot scouting department. We should have been seeing them in New York during the Lundqvist years. That's that. The Leafs, too, already went into it. Don't need to go into it anymore. They graded up a little bit, similar to what some other teams did, akin to the next team I'm going to talk about, and a team I didn't pay enough attention to. That's Tampa Bay Lightning. I looked over these guys. I really did, and it's my own fault, but you bring in a guy like Connor Sheary, won championships in Pittsburgh. Calvin DeHaan was on those Islanders teams that went on runs. And, Tyler Mott, who was on the Rangers team that went on a run to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 years ago. Wealth of playoff experience. Now, remember what I said about Anaheim a couple weeks ago in our preview show about how, you brought in guys like Radko Gudas and you brought in guys like Alex Killorn. Wealth of playoff experience to a team that doesn't have that core yet. Well, this is the exact opposite. Tampa still has all of those guys. You still have Stamkos. You still have Point. You still have Kucherov. You still have Vasilevsky. You still have Hedman. You're adding experience to a team that already has it. And I'm going to be real curious to see if maybe Tampa makes another run here. I don't know. I don't know if they have what it takes to go make another run to the Stanley Cup and where they are draft-wise, where they are cap-wise, where they may be at the deadline. But I do like these moves. I really like these moves. And Connor Sheary was a huge, huge, huge part of those two teams that won 2 Stanley Cups in a row in Pittsburgh in 16 and 17. And he brings it right here. Now, on the other side of the coin, guys, we can't mask this anymore. And there's no good answer here. The Boston Bruins, and I'm sorry. if you have basketball fans here, they Jerry Krause the team like the 98 Chicago Bulls, you know. And like I said last year, this team kind of reminded me of another team. This is a hockey team now. I'm going to talk about the Dallas Stars in 99, where they went all out with veterans to try and win a cup. They won that cup, but at the same time, they didn't have a hard cap nor an internal cap to deal with, so they got to bring most of them back. I'm sorry. In Boston, the center depth is terrible. And although you could look to the past and when they would let guys go, like, say, Torrey Krug and Milan Lucic, who is actually now back, and Nathan Horton, to replenish them with younger prospects they had in the system, they don't have any this time. But here's your other conundrum now, too, if you're the Boston Bruins. You have guys like David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy, who are still fairly young. And if I'm the Bruins right now, I don't care how bad they are this year. I don't care how middle of the road they are this year. You still can't move them out either. It's still too early to be blowing the team up and moving those guys out. You also have Brad Marchand, too. Now, obviously, he's, in his 30s, now mid-30s, but you just named him captain. You can't really move him out either. So if you're the Bruins, you're kind of stuck right now. You got to hope like hell that you're able to, have a good draft this year. And some of those young guys that you do have down there in a not-so-great prospect pool maybe turn some heads. And I know throughout history, the Bruins have been able to turn it around quick. But this could be a year in the doldrums for the Bruins where they're stuck in quicksand, where you're not a contender anymore. And let's be obvious, they're not a contender anymore. We can't beat around the bush. I'm not going to sit here and say the Boston Bruins are going to win the Stanley Cup this year because it's obvious they're not. But at the same time, you can't be like a team like we talked about last week, like the St. Louis Blues, the team that beat them in the finals in 19, who are saying, okay, guys, we're just letting you know, we're up for sale. We're tearing it down. We're rebuilding. Right now, the Bruins, with the assets they have, you just can't trade those guys right now because it just doesn't make any sense because they're still fairly young, especially Pastrnak and especially McAvoy.
Yeah, I mean, for the Boston Bruins, you kind of hit the nail on the head when it comes to teams that look weaker on paper coming into this upcoming season. The Boston Bruins decide to reach into the clearance section to replace like franchise cornerstones in Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. I mean, you look at their center depth, and we're going to look at that in just a little bit. Their center depth might be the weakest in the entire NHL, and that even includes the San Jose Sharks. I'm sorry. Like, I'm the biggest Pavel Zacha apologist in the world, and he has looked a lot better with Boston than he did with New Jersey. But he's coming in as your top line center this year, trying to flank James Van Riemsdyk and David Pastrnak. I just don't see it. I don't know. He's a very talented player, and he's a very talented center. He's great. He's a great option if you're hoping for a center 2 or a center 3. He's not a center 1. And I think that's going to be a really big problem for Boston coming into this year is that center depth. Charlie Coyle is still a nice piece, but you look down the rest of the lineup and it's weak. You go beyond those first 2 lines and it's just weak across the board. What the one saving grace for the Boston Bruins, however, is they might possibly sport not only the strongest defense in the Atlantic Division, they might sport the strongest defense in the entire Eastern Conference when you look at it on paper. It's a very good defense, and still having the two-headed monster of Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman in net, that is what's going to help Boston potentially stay above water to the best of their ability, but they're stuck in purgatory right now. Yeah. Tom mentioned it before. You really can't move out David Pastrnak yet. You really can't move out Charlie McAvoy yet. You really shouldn't move out Brad Marchand after you just named him captain. Oops. And rightfully so. I mean, Brad Marchand deserved the C. He's worked his butt off to be named a Boston Bruins captain, but you really can't move him out at this point. And Buffalo has really kind of, pigeonholed themselves into a really, really tight corner here. But I mentioned some favorite transactions before, but let's talk about some teams that really didn't add anything, but are still better on paper coming into this year. First off, the Buffalo Sabres. Let's talk about them for a second. The Buffalo Sabres, I think, are primed to be a very surprising team in the NHL this year. I think letting certain players develop more is going to help Buffalo maybe even reach the playoffs as early as this year. Giving another year of development for players such as Tage Thompson, J.J. Peterka, Dylan Cousins, Casey Middlestat, Peyton Krebs, Jordan Greenway, who they acquired from Minnesota last year. And then looking at the defense, where you have Rasmus Dahlin that just got his big boy contract and is now emerged as a top 10 defenseman in the entire NHL. Owen Power, who is right behind him on the left-hand side, who is still coming into his own as a player. And I think it could even make that bigger jump this year as one of the NHL's more formidable offensive threats at defense this year. You also add important pieces like Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson with playoff experience, with a load of veteran experience coming into that defense. And I think that's going to make a huge difference for the for the Buffalo Sabres this year. And then add on top of that, Devin Levi, who is a Calder Trophy favorite this year, in between the pipes, probably going to get the majority of the time as a rookie goaltender this year. Could be a lot of exciting things to watch for Buffalo this year. They were a really fun team to watch last year. I'm excited to watch them again. And we'll just kind of see what happens coming into the season. I think Buffalo could be really, really, really fun. But the entire Atlantic Division is nothing to scoff at this year. I mean, do you really see any kind of like bottom barrel teams this year, Tom?
I mean, there's the obvious one that sticks out like a sore thumb, and that's the Montreal Canadiens. But, we know what they're doing. We were no stranger to what they're doing. They're still very much rebuilding down there in Montreal. Where am I, in the North Pole? Where am I, in Yellowknife, driving a truck on the ice roads?
Hey, what's that reindeer behind you?
Yeah, really. Am I driving on the ice roads? No. I mean, it is Montreal. Montreal sticks out like a sore thumb. Obviously, you have a good front office up there with Jeff Gorton and the like. Losing out on Bedard, I think, was a bit of a loss for them. But we got to see where they go and how they develop the Habs. Like I've said it before, and I'll say it again, they're finally doing it right. But it's not. I mean, this year, I think Montreal is your obvious last place team.
Yeah, this year could be a bit of a wash for Montreal, but hey, I actually do foresee Montreal being at least stronger than they were last year, simply because just the same argument that I made for the Buffalo Sabres, which is you've allowed another year of development for some of these bigger prospects, and you've allowed the opportunity for some players to get healthy. Cole Caulfield is going to state his case this year as a top 25 forward in the NHL. And I'm excited to see that and see if he can really kind of dominate and show that he is. You look at that top line, potentially if it stays healthy for the Montreal Canadiens, of Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, and Sean Monahan. That's not a bad top line. And then maybe by year's end, maybe Uri Slafkovsky's playing on that right-hand side instead of Sean Monahan, with Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki being the heavy to the little littler guys. But it could be a lot of fun to watch. Just another year of Montreal development this year. Kirby Dach has kind of shown that he was absolutely worth the number 3 overall pick from Chicago a few years ago. Unfortunately, Chicago's not going to reap the benefit of that because he's now Montreal's, but still.
I don't think they're gonna be missing him too much. They got this kid out there.
They got this kid out there, but you know what? It could have been fun to see Connor Bedard as your number 1 center and then Kirby Dach as your number 2 center. That could have been like a really sick tandem at some point down the line. But what it could have, should have, it all contributed to Connor Bedard going to the Chicago Blackhawks anyway. So
as much as I hate to say it, though, it's like with Edmonton comparing Connor McDavid to Taylor Hall. It's like a similar analogy. It's not there yet. We don't know. Because we don't know what Bedard's going to be. We all think he's going to be good, but stranger things have happened. Exactly. But it's like the same thing. It's like Edmonton, okay, you go nuts for giving up Taylor Hall, but then again, you gave up Taylor Hall, and you essentially, his replacement in the draft was Connor McDavid. So I don't think you ever feel too bad about that.
I tend to agree, but I'm even looking at the third line for the Montreal Canadiens here, and I'm at least intrigued of, your third line is slated to potentially be right now Brendan Gallagher, Alex Newhook, and Josh Anderson. I don't hate that third line, and I think a lot of teams, especially the Boston Bruins this year, would be happy to have that third line this year.
Oh, no, I've always sung Newhook's praises. He's a good player.
Yeah. I mean, and even the defense is still developing. David Savard is your rock on that top pairing with Michael Matheson, who was acquired from the Pittsburgh Penguins also. That can't be overlooked too. Caden Gooley's going to get another year of development this year as well, alongside Arbor Chekai, which is going to, I mean, he really emerged last year as an NHL defenseman as well. It can't be understated how well he was. Also, it can't be understated that I can pronounce Arbor Chekai, but I can't pronounce any other names in the NHL. But even still, I also had to review that one, even still. But Montreal, even though they're a bargain barrel team, I think there's still a glimmer of hope for Montreal fans. It's not all doom and gloom. And I think their exciting times are yet to come. There are just still some question marks that need to be answered, and a few more years of development until Montreal can see themselves as one of those contenders in the Atlantic Division. But, I've talked enough about how strong the Atlantic Division is. I've sung the praises long enough. Let's actually take a look from Daily Faceoff right now, what the potential starting lineups could be on opening night next week, which crazy to think opening night is already next week, which is awesome to see. Can't wait to watch more hockey. But let's take a look at Daily Faceoff. And as usual, when we're looking at Daily Faceoff, take these rosters with a big grain of salt. There are also injuries to be listed as well, a few of which might not even be applicable at the start of the actual season itself. So let's go into that right now. So I'm going to project now Daily Faceoff, which is awkwardly going to just take a few seconds here. And uno momento. And wait a second. There it is. Perfect. There we go. We got it now. So looking at Daily Faceoff here, we're starting with the Boston Bruins here, looking at a top line of James Van Riemsdyk, Pavel Zacha, and David Pastrnak. On the second line for the Boston Bruins, the captain, Brad Marchand. I'm not going to get used to saying that, by the way, even still. Charlie Coyle and Jake DeBrusk, a healthy Jake DeBrusk at that. Looking at the third line here for the Boston Bruins, Jesper Boqvist with Matthew Poitras. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. And Trent Frederick. And onto the fourth line, Milan Lucic, John Beecher, and Jacob Lauko. Looking at the defense here for the Boston Bruins, I mentioned it before that it was a strong defense. Now you get to see it for yourself. On the top pairing, Mac Grzelcyk with Charlie McAvoy. On the second pairing, Hampus Lindholm with Brandon Carlo. And on the third pairing, Derek Forbort with Kevin Shattenkirk. I like that defense on paper. I really do. And then, obviously, the goaltending, Linus Ullmark as your 1A, Jeremy Swayman as your 1B. I've mentioned on previous episodes, but I don't like to go over the power play and penalty kill lines because they're ever changing, ever developing. If you're curious for yourself, hit up dailyfaceoff.com so that way you can check them out yourself. I'll certainly kind of scroll by and give you the quick preview if you want to go frame by frame and check it out. Moving over to the Buffalo Sabres, looking at the top line for the Buffalo Sabres here, Jeff Skinner with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck. Over to the second line, J.J. Peterka with Dylan Cousins and Casey Middlestat. The third line for the Buffalo Sabres, Jordan Greenway with Peyton Krebs and Victor Olofsson. And the fourth line of Zemgus Girgensons, Tyson Jost, and Kyle Okposo, the captain, Kyle Okposo. And down to the defensive pairings here for the Buffalo Sabres. On the first pairing, Rasmus Dahlin with Connor Clifton. On the second pairing, Owen Power with Henry Yokiharu. And on the third pairing, Matthias Samuelsson with Eric Johnson. Going on down to the goaltending, your 1A for the Buffalo Sabres this year, Devin Levi, with your 1B, Eric Comrie. It should be mentioned that Jack Quinn is currently out with an injury. I'm not sure if he's supposed to be in the opening night lineup. We'll just have to see. I don't have the details on that. My apologies for that. Scrolling on down now to the Detroit Red Wings. Going on down to Detroit. The top line right now for the Detroit Red Wings slates to be Alex DeBrincat, Dylan Larkin, and Lucas Raymond. I like that top line a lot, actually. That's a really nice top line for the Detroit Red Wings. Could be a very productive line. Second line for the Detroit Red Wings, Michael Rasmussen with Andrew Kopp and David Perron. On the third line, Robbie Fabry with JT Comfort and Daniel Sprong. And on the fourth line, Jonathan Bergen, Joe Veleno, and Christian Fisher. On down to the defense here for the Detroit Red Wings. We've got Jake Wallman with Moritz Seider. On the second pairing, Ben Sherratt with Jeff Petrie. And on the third pairing, Shane Gostabert with Justin Hull. Certainly a lot of veteran leadership here down on the defense, but it can't be overstated. Moritz Seider, I think this year, as early as this year, certainly states his claim as a top 10 defenseman in the NHL. Bold take there, but we'll see where it goes. The goaltending here for the Detroit Red Wings, your 1A is Ville Husso, and your 1B is James Reimer. Going on now down to the Florida Panthers, who we really haven't mentioned that much, even though they reached the Stanley Cup final. But, oh well. On the top line for the Florida Panthers, Gregory Denisenko with Alexander Barkov and Evan Rodriguez. On the second line, Carter Verhaeghe with Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk. On the third line, Eetu Luostarinen, Anton Lundell, and Sam Reinhart. And on the fourth line, Ryan Lomberg with Steven Lorentz and Nick Cousins. Going down to the defense here for the Florida Panthers, Gustav Forsling with Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the top pairing. On the second pairing, Nico Mikkola with Dmitry Kulikov. And on the third pairing, Josh Mahura with Mike Riley. Yes, we are missing a few names on that defense. We'll get to that in just a few seconds here. Going down to the goaltending here, we've got as your 1A to start the season, Sergei Bobrovsky. And as your 1B, a returning Spencer Knight. Hope you're well. And should be mentioned, Patrick Hornqvist is not actually on IR. He is retired officially. And out right now is Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour, still working off that Stanley Cup finals hangover for sure.
Believe me, my eyes is going to last all season. So
yeah, I mean, Aaron Ekblad, the poor dude's made of glass, but when he's healthy, he's such a fantastic goaltender. Defenseman. But hope he's well. We talked about him before, but the Montreal Canadiens, looking at the top line here, as I mentioned before, Cole Caulfield with Nick Suzuki and Sean Monahan. On the second line, we've got Raphael Harvey-Pinard with Kirby Dach and Juraj Slafkovsky, the former number 1 overall pick from last year. Looking at the third line, we've got Brendan Gallagher with Alex Newhook, recently acquired from the Colorado Avalanche, and Josh Anderson, who fans keep trying to will him to the New Jersey Devils. Stop. Please, I don't want to see that happen. Thank you. So over to the fourth line for the Montreal Canadiens, we've got Tanner Pearson with Jake Evans and Joel Armia. Down to the defensive pairings here for the I can't speak. Oh, good Lord. Going on to the defensive pairings for the Montreal Canadiens there. Maybe I should slow down a little bit. We've got Michael Matheson with David Savard on the top pairing. On the second pairing, we've got Jordan Harris with Jonathan Kovacevic. And on the third pairing, we've got Arber Chekai with Caden Gooley. Going on down to the goaltending here, we've got Jake Allen as your 1A and Samuel Montembeault as your 1B. Not sure how long Christian Dvorak is out for, but interesting to note for the forward pairings for sure. Also not mentioned here under injuries is Carey Price. That's simply because it's kind of assumed that he is at the moment a forced retirement, but we'll monitor that as the season goes on for sure. Moving on down now, we've got to scroll a little ways over to the Ottawa Senators here. Oh yeah. And we really got to look at this one because the Ottawa Senators could be a lot of fun to watch this year as they were a little bit last year. Looking at the top line, for the Ottawa Senators, we got Brady Tkachuk with Tim Stützle and Claude Giroux. On the second line, we've got Vladimir Tarasenko with Josh Norris and Drake Batherson. Over to the third line for the Ottawa Senators, Ridley Greig, Shane Pinto, and Dominic Kubalik. And on to the fourth line for the Ottawa Senators, Matthew Joseph with Mark Kastelich and Zach McCowan. Going on down to the defense, I mentioned it before that it was a pretty strong defense. Now you can see it for yourself. On the top pairing for the Ottawa Senators this year, Thomas Chabot with Jacob Chychrun, acquired from the Arizona Coyotes last year at the deadline. On the second pairing for the Ottawa Senators, we've got Jake Sanderson with Artem Zub, who I think would be the best name for a Marvel villain. I know I said it last year, but I'm not going to stop overstating that. That is a fantastic name. And down to the third pairing for the Ottawa Senators, Eric Brandstrom and Travis Hamonic. The goaltending for the Ottawa Senators this year, we've got as your 1A, Joonas Korpisalo, and your 1B, Anton Forsberg. And as noted, Josh Norris finished off the year on IR, spent a large chunk of last year on the IR, actually, but he should be ready and good to go for opening night. Scrolling on down, we're almost done here, going on down to the Tampa Bay Lightning, your former two-time Stanley Cup champions, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. Looking at the top line here for the Tampa Bay Lightning, Steven Stamkos with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov.
And let me interject one thing. How many times have I said doing that is going to get them in trouble?
Yeah, it's going to for sure. And I also don't think that that's going to stick.
Yeah, no, I know I praised them earlier, but yeah, that's got to change, and it probably will.
It probably will. Honestly, I could see Brandon Hagel playing on that top line with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov most nights, honestly, because I think that would be a better way of kind of breaking things up a little bit. Going on down to the second line at the moment for the Tampa Bay Lightning, we've got Brandon Hagel with Anthony Cirelli and Connor Sheary. On to the third line for the Tampa Bay Lightning, Michael Isamont. I definitely butchered that too, but it's fine. With Nick Paul and Tanner Jeannot. And the fourth line for the Tampa Bay Lightning, Logan Brown with Luke Glendening and Tyler Mott. So a bunch of new faces, all new faces on that bottom line this year for the Tampa Bay Lightning. The defensive pairings for the Tampa Bay Lightning are as follows. On the top pairing, Victor Hedman with Nicholas Perbix. On the second pairing, we've got Mikhail Sergachev with Eric Chernak. And on the third pairing, Calvin DeHaan with Zach Bogosian. Looking on down to the goaltending, and, well, that's probably not going to happen come opening night, but we'll mention it now. I'll also just say for sure, your starting goaltender is Andrei Vasilevsky. I haven't really heard otherwise that he won't be ready for opening night. Tom, anything on your end there?
It's been back and forth. They're saying he may miss 5 or 10 games to start. He's not going to be out all year. Yeah. And even then, Jonas Johansson is a perfectly fine backup, and a very interesting name backing him up to start the year, Hugo Alnefelt. And if that name is not familiar, remember back to a few years ago, Team Sweden for the World Cup Juniors team, not World Cup Juniors, World Juniors team for Team Sweden. Hugo Alnefelt was one of the best goaltenders in a few years ago's tournament. It was either 2020 or 2021, and he was absolutely dynamite between the pipes. So he's a very interesting prospect to kind of monitor moving forward. He's had a tough transition going up the professional divisions, but he's still right now that third option right now for the Tampa Bay Lightning. All right, let's get to the lineup you've all been waiting for, the Toronto Maple Leafs, because that's what we're really here for. On the top line for the Toronto Maple Leafs, we've got Tyler Bertuzzi with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. Also, Austin Matthews getting paid, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Looking at the second line here for the Toronto Maple Leafs, we've got Matthew Knees with John Tavares and Sam Lafferty. On to the third line, we've got Nicholas Robertson with Willie Nylander and Max Domi. And on the fourth line for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Cale Yarncroc with David Kampf and Ryan Reeves. Going on down to the defensive pairing for the Toronto Maple Leafs, we've got Morgan Riley with TJ Brody. On the second pairing, we've got Jake McCabe with Simone Benoit. And on the third pairing, we've got Mark Giordano with Timothy Liljegren. Looking at the goaltending here for the Toronto Maple Leafs, we've got Ilya Samsonov as your 1A and Joseph Woll as your 1B. Should be mentioned right now that Matt Murray is currently on IR, although I think Joseph Woll, even despite that, is probably your backup goaltender even still. And John Klingberg is currently day-to-day, so he's going to factor into that onto the right-hand side somewhere in here, whether it's taking up Simone Benoit's spot or taking up Timothy Liljegren's spot. So that's going to be something to kind of monitor as well as we start this season. So I know I just threw a whole lot out there, and I know there's a whole lot to digest in general here, but Tom, I'm going to start it off here with you. Based on these projections alone, which lineup looks the strongest and which ones look the weakest right now? Well, I got to go with Toronto, Tampa, and Ottawa as the strongest, and the weakest I mentioned earlier, Montreal Canadiens. But that's basically it. The middle of the division is going to be a little bit of a mess, but that's where I'm sticking.
Yeah, I mean, to me right now, on paper, the strongest on paper right now are the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they still are. And a lot of people even say, well, they lost their depth. Yeah, but they still have their core guys locked in, lock, stocked, and barreled. And so long as they have that locked in, they're going to be fine. Toronto, I might make fun of their lineup. I might make fun of the decisions that they make, but it still shouldn't be understated. They're a very, very, very good hockey team that has just stepped on their own foot time and time again when the playoffs roll around. Will that continue this year? Could happen. All I know is this is a very, very important year this year and next year for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's put up or shut up time at this point. You know, you've got players on this team that, you know, together with all three of them make up, you know, at least a third of your cap space. So you really got to figure this out at this point and put up or shut up and at least make it to the Eastern Conference Final at this point. It needs to happen. Other strong teams on paper, the Ottawa Senators. I really, really like this lineup this year, and I think they are a very strong team this year. The Florida Panthers, I still think look strong on paper, so long as they also get healthy for Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour. I think that defense is as strong as ever. As well, adding Nico Mikkola, I think was a very good addition and will help that defense also. And overall, like that forward core is still stronger than ever with the addition of Matthew Tkachuk from last year. And lastly, the Buffalo Sabres. I can't understate this enough. Don't sleep on the Buffalo Sabres this year. They are going to be a surprise team this year. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch. If they don't make the playoffs this year, they're still going to be a fun team to watch regardless. And I'm pulling for them to make the playoffs as well. Bottom of the barrel is Montreal, but this could at least be the year that they start to turn things in the correct direction. Their prospect depth is very good, and we're going to start seeing some of their prospects like really start to make the difference at the NHL level starting this year. And maybe they might start taking advantage over the next few years as older teams like the Boston Bruins start to fall out of favor in the Atlantic Division here. Could be a lot of fun and interesting to watch. All right. It's time to project things. It's time to predict things. Tom, your standings prediction by year's end, 1 through 8. What do you think?
This one was really hard to do, but we're going to go with it here. First place, it's kind of obvious, Toronto Maple Leafs. Second place, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler here. The provincial rivals, Battle of Ontario up top, Ottawa Senators, second place. Third place, you know them, you love them, old reliable, Tampa Bay Lightning. Fourth place, I'm not singing Buffalo's praises. I don't know if I'm as hot on them as you are, but I'm giving them fourth place. Potentially a playoff team. We got to see. Fifth place, Boston Bruins. I still think they're better than three other teams in this division, but these aren't the Boston Bruins of yesteryear. At least not now. And I don't know if we're going to have a lunch pail AC revival this year. I don't know if they're going to automatically, find a Jean Rattel and a Brad Park to, reinvigorate the team after Phil Esposito and Bobby Orr got too old in the 70s. So I just don't see it happening this year. Maybe if things go south in Winnipeg with Mark Scheifele, but I don't even know who the hell they would trade for him. But that's besides the point. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sixth place, Florida Panthers. I didn't buy it last year. They got to the finals, but that's about all they're doing. I'm not drinking Florida's Kool-Aid. I didn't drink it last year. They were partly responsible for maybe one of the worst Stanley Cup finals I ever watched. Going with them in sixth place. Seventh place. This could be interchangeable, and even interchangeable with Boston too is Detroit. I like Detroit's first line. I hope Mo Seider has a revival of a year. But just outside of that, I don't see much else from these Red Wings right now. I don't. And to be out of the playoffs 8 straight years, if you would have told me that 20 years ago, even 15 years ago with the Red Wings, I would have said you're nuts, because the Red Wings were always a team that could replenish players and just keep on winning. And guys, I mean, you may have not been around for it, you may have, but I mean, from 1993 to somewhere around 2012, they were cup contenders. And up until 2015, they were talked about as being a team that could probably go to a conference final. To miss the playoffs 8 years in a row for this organization is unfathomable. And this year may be the 8th year in a row for the Red Wings. I'm sorry. They're skating in quicksand up there in Detroit, and I don't know what can fix this. I don't. 8th place, we talked about them. Montreal, nothing more to see here. Move along.
Yeah, I mean, to echo Tom's point before, and just as a overall just blanket statement, the Atlantic Division for me was tough to peg, at least in the middle. Like the number 1 and number 8 were easy for me to figure out, but like everything else in between could go any way, any which way this year, I honestly think, on either side, for real. But Tom did it, so I'm going to do it. So finishing in first place, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I still think that they're number 1 in this division just simply because their firepower is too great. We're going to have questions come playoff time, though, for sure. Number 2, I've got the Tampa Bay Lightning here. I still like what Tampa's throwing out there. The only way I could see Tampa finishing lower is if Steven Stamkos's contract situation, which he's slated to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year, if those contract talks go so far south that he demands out and wants out of Tampa Bay, which I don't know if I foresee yet. If he says in February, I want out, here's a list of teams that I don't want to be traded to, here's a list of teams that I would easily waive a no movement or no trade clause to, I could see Tampa Bay working out a deal for Steven Stamkos out of Tampa Bay if they really can't extend the contract. And it would really suck to see, because a Tampa Bay lifer like that, to leave like that, it would be much akin to like Martin St. Louis leaving the Tampa Bay Lightning back in the late 2000s. It would be
different circumstances. I mean, Le Cavalier was gone at some point too. Patrick Kane was out. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves are now out of Chicago. I mean, here's what I'll say about Stamkos, and I don't mean to interject.
No, you're fine.
Keep moving here. Stamkos was the guy for a while. I'd say from when he came in 08 to maybe say around 2018 or 19. But I mean, in order of importance, when they won those 2 cups in a row, you go down to players they have. He may have been the captain, yes. May have been the captain, yes. But he may have been, in order of importance, the 5th most important player on those teams. And I mean, I would say it was Steve Yzerman like in Detroit, but I don't even know if I want to say that, because when the Red Wings won the 3 cups with Yzerman, I mean, he was an integral part of those teams. Hell, the Red Wings, and I'll go back to them, were still dependent on Steve Yzerman into 2004 when he was on his older side. But if you look at Tampa now, I mean, he's been usurped as a first-line center by Braden Point, gets bumped up and down. I mean, they may very well be parting ways this year. If not this year, then in the summer. I don't think they'll trade him at the deadline. I don't see it. But in the summertime, it's going to be an interesting situation down there in Tampa.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be really interesting to monitor. I mean, not for nothing, but Stamkos really hasn't even lost a step coming into age 33. I mean, you think about it, this is a guy that this past season in 81 games had 84 points. He had 50 assists. He had 34 goals. This is a guy that a year before that had 106 points in 80 games played. He is still, a elite player in the NHL for sure. Yeah. That it would be difficult to fathom seeing Tampa Bay move on from him, honestly, in my mind. I do have to believe that something gets done, because that would be the final nail in the coffin, I think, for Tampa Bay's perennial cup runs. I think losing Steven Stamkos would be a lot heavier than a lot of people realize. But moving on from here, I've got Tampa Bay finishing number 2 here, if all breaks right. Finishing number 3 for me, the Ottawa Senators. I truly do believe that this is the big leap year for them, and I think they make it to the playoffs this year. Coming in 4th, I'm going to agree with Tom here, the Buffalo Sabres. I really do like this lineup so much, and I can see them finishing as high as 3rd. Honestly, if something catastrophic goes wrong in Tampa Bay or Ottawa, I could see them finishing 3rd easy. Finishing 5th here for me for the Atlantic Division, I've got the Florida Panthers. This lineup needs to stay healthy. That's the biggest thing. And I think if they don't stay healthy, I just don't foresee the magic like last year where everybody got healthy at the correct time in March, and then all of a sudden they were the strongest team in the NHL going into the playoffs and knocking out a Boston Bruins lineup that should have won the Stanley Cup, quite frankly. But it's in the past at this point, as they say. Speaking of the Boston Bruins, I have them finishing in 6th. And this is kind of controversial because I'll even say this right now and amend this. I could see Boston finishing as high as 3rd. I really could. I might have knocked their forward depth. I really do question the amount of goals that they can score this year, but they have David Pastrnak. At the end of the day, this is a guy that's putting up 50 to 70 goals a year for sure. And I think he's going to continue to do that this year, whether or not he has Bergeron feeding him the puck, whether he has a David Krejci feeding him the puck. He is one of the more talented forwards in the NHL. He is a top 5 winger in the NHL for sure. Might even be top 3 for sure. But I could see Boston finishing as high as 3rd. I've got him 6th here just because I really, really question that forward depth and that center depth. And I think that could be a really big sticking point for them this year, that they're really going to regret not doing enough to replace him. And as Tom mentioned before, who can you have no prospects. Who realistically can you trade to go and get a Mark Scheifele? You don't have enough draft picks at this point to do that. And you're wasting more draft capital at that point. So they're really stuck in a sticky situation here. So we're going to see what happens with Boston. I see them finishing in 6th place, but I could see them finishing as high as 3rd. The Detroit Red Wings, I've got finishing 7th right now, and it's unfortunate because I could see them finishing higher. I could see them being just outside the bubble of the playoffs this year, maybe even finishing in 4th or 5th place. But they're going to have to really gain some ground this year for that to happen, and they're going to need some prospects to make their long-awaited debut to really maybe even see that come to fruition. I still think they're spinning the tires, waiting for Simon Edvinsson to really hit his stride and crack the NHL roster. I think they're spinning their wheels until Sebastian Cossa is ready to become an NHL goaltender, which might take another year or so for that to happen and usurp Ville Husso as the starting goaltender. I think Steve Yzerman is playing the long game right now, and I think that's honestly what he's playing. Also playing the long game here, finishing in 8th place, and we've already beat to death Canadians, man. Everything's right, but we're just
crap.
Rounding out here. If I can actually click on something, there we go. Question of the day here to wrap up our episode here. Tom, let's have you answer first. Which team is the team to beat in the division this year, and why is it the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Just the lineup in general. I like them better than anybody else at this point. I got to go with the Leafs. They haven't had to deal with a lot of problems yet in the offseason. We'll see. Maybe they'll win 2 rounds this year after finally winning 1 last year.
Yeah, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're the team to beat this year. But Toronto, do us all a favor and don't waste Austin Matthews' prime years. But then again, I'm going to look down the hard camera for this one because this might be a controversial take. Eviscerate me down below. I don't care because I'm not changing my opinion. Austin Matthews does not care whether he goes to a Stanley Cup or not because he just got paid and could care less. And I mean that. So do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you want to eviscerate me down below? Let me know. And who knows? Maybe I'll even answer. Maybe I won't, but we'll see. But guys, thank you guys again for joining us here at I-80 Sports. If you like our content, make sure you subscribe down below, youtube.com/I-80 Sports. Join the conversation down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree with our takes? Do you disagree with my very ice cold takes? And hit us up in the comment section. Who do you think is the team to beat in the Atlantic Division? What are you excited to see in the Atlantic Division too? You got to let us know down below and hit the like button so that way we can know if you like what we're currently doing, and make sure that you hit the bell notification because next week we're coming at you with our final division preview. We're hitting it up on Columbus Day. The Metropolitan Division is coming very, very soon, right before the start of the regular season. And then away to the races we go to watch and see what happens in the NHL this upcoming season. If you currently follow us on X, or if you don't follow us on X, make sure you follow us down below at I80_sports NHL. And if you follow us already, Thank you guys so much because we greatly value all of your support. But it's time to get away from here. It's time to start focusing on the Metropolitan Division that's coming up next week and then the start of the NHL season. And we can't wait to bring you that. But until then, I'm Brian. He's Tom. This has been yet another episode of NHL on I-80 Sports.